Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Spring Knowledge Exchange. And we are so thankful that you are here and that you've taken time out of your day to join us. We are excited for a jam-packed hour, so we're going to make our introduction short this morning. Just so you all know that today's session will be recorded, but our guest, Ary, will be spotlit. So if you would like to keep your camera on, please do so. And if you'd like to turn it off today, that's totally okay. We want to start this morning by acknowledging the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people on Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 11 lands who share a history and deep connection with these lands where our team lives and works. We dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We acknowledge that building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people is a work of the heart that requires a certain humbling to allow our hearts and minds to accept new, sometimes challenging information and act on it through questioning privilege and transferring it to those who have less. Apple Schools is committed to an ongoing reflection of our allyship as we move forward to create an inclusive, safe, and understanding country for all who live on this land. Apple Schools is 100% donor funded, and the reach and impact of our project is made possible by our valued donors. We are so proud of the ongoing partnerships with organizations like the Calgary Flames Foundation, Canadian Natural Resources Limited, Staples Canada, Interpipeline, Public Health Agency of Canada, and St. Michael's Foundation. Without the support of these valued donors and friends, our project would not be possible. We've included a link in the chat today showing all of our donors supporting the work that we're doing, so please feel free to check them out. Now, I'm so privileged to introduce Ary Maharaj, him, who works in the community education at the National Eating Disorder Information Center, spearheading work across the country that aims to create body-inclusive environments where people feel accepted and respected. As a registered psychotherapist, Ary provides reduced cost psychotherapy through Hard Feelings Mental Health and at Sheena's Place. He co-facilitates free group-based supports for racialized folks experiencing disordered eating, and he is immensely passionate about practicing from a place of cultural humility and aims to balance recognizing the impact of systemic injustices on mental health with creating spaces that allow people to have breathing room to experience collective healing. We look forward to Ary's insights on how schools can play a pivotal role in addressing and supporting health, especially around bodies and eating. And he's going to also give you some practical takeaways to support your school environments. So we are thrilled to have Ary today join us for this free virtual professional development event offered to our schools and our partners. Ary, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks to the larger Apple Schools team. It's been really nice to connect with you after more so admiration from afar, and nice to get to have the space to get to talk with those of you working in schools at the moment on a topic that I think is something that's near and dear to my heart and probably near and dear to the hearts of many of us around us, given just how many of us we all have a relationship with our body. We all have a relationship with eating. We all have a relationship with movement, and we all have a relationship with health. And how do we convey messages like that to the people around us, loved ones, but also the students and families that we support? So I hope that today will be a seed planting activity where I'll share with you why the focus on this now, and also from a philosophical place, like why do I and NEDIC have the values that we have when we do this work, and then give you some seeds that you can potentially think through for what that looks like in your practice. While I have experience getting a chance to support schools all across the country through my work at NEDIC, which I'll talk to you about in a sec, I am not an in the classroom educator. And so from a place of humility, like Tina mentioned, I present this to you and take what you want to take and leave what you want to leave. And I trust your knowledge of what you know best about your environment. But I'm happy for this to be as much of a dialogue as we can have in an hour. I've put a note into the chat, which I'll repost here, that if you have questions throughout, I'll have the chat open and I'll try my best to address them as I go. Nicole kindly sent 6 pre-submitted questions that I've incorporated into the presentation that I'm going to try to address for those who asked pre-submitted questions. And then hopefully there's also a little bit of time at the end. I don't have to run right at um, 9:30 your time for the Albertans, so the mountain folks in the room. So therefore, I'm happy to hang tight in case that's a way we can chat. Um, from a volume and a pace place, how am I doing so far? People feel like they can hear me loud enough and stuff. Okay, I see some thumbs up on video. I see some affirmation in chat. Wonderful. If that ever changes, don't hesitate to let me know. Um, for those of you who have never heard of NEDIC before, the National Information Center is where I spend 4 of the 5 days of my week. And we get to support the country in 3 main ways. Like Apple Schools, we're a registered charity, and we operate a telephone helpline and live chat service that's staffed by a trained support team for anyone across the country impacted by disordered eating who wants to reach out. That includes, unfortunately, kids as young as like 8, 9, 10 who have like questions about their body or about eating or about family members to like people in their like 60s and 70s who have had like diagnosed clinical eating disorders for decades. It's really meant to be like a front door service where there's no diagnosis necessary. And so we chat with thousands of Canadians every year and do a lot of like mental health partnerships with Kids Help Phones, CMHAs, etc. of the world. Community education is what you're getting right now. We get a chance to do live educational workshops virtually Canada-wide, but also in person in the Greater Toronto area, which is where NEDIC's offices are based. And the goal here and our goal today is really prevention and early intervention. How do we create body inclusive, food positive environments in our schools to hopefully prevent mental health issues around those things from happening? And how do we intervene early when we do notice things happening? So we'll talk a little bit about both those things. And finally, I have tried to make this slide deck, which I'll send as a PDF afterwards, so you all will have access to it, as much of a library as I can. NEDIC creates a lot of our own resources, but we also partner with organizations across the country and researchers across the country to develop evidence-informed tools for you all to use. That includes folks like you in teaching school environments, but also people like healthcare providers in more clinical ways. And so you'll get a chance to see a bunch of resources that are linked throughout. Something to keep in mind as a visual indicator is you notice on this slide, there's a purple banner across the top. I've tried to use that color as an indicator of like when is a slide most appropriate for you. And you'll see that switch to green sometimes. If you see a green banner, that usually means that that's a slide that I think you could even like plug and play in a school environment. It contains some information that you could potentially inform a lesson plan with or something like that. So purple, you, green, uh, feel free to go and utilize to the extent you want to with your students. But here are our goals. We're going to explore a little bit of the why, like how come all the messiness about health makes our jobs a lot harder, and especially in relation to bodies and eating. How do we teach about that? Why do we teach about that in a certain way? I'm going to connect this issue to some larger like health efforts across Canada and affecting people all across Canada. And I hope to spend more time getting to discuss strategies that are ideas that we share with schools and we've worked with teachers on, but potentially things that you might be able to think about how that might incorporate into the work you do with Apple Schools and the stuff you do in your classroom environment. So a little bit of the why. Um, we have really crappy data in Canada about mental health in general, but that's even more so true for mental health issues that are affecting eating and body image, like eating disorders. But our last estimate of national prevalence was in 2012, which you all know was 15 years ago, which is wild. But anyways, um, in 2023, we finally had a chance to insert some ED questions in a population-based screener done in a public health way through Mental Health Research Canada. And the numbers that we found were unfortunate. Nearly 1 in 3 Canadians being at high risk of an eating disorder, with an additional 24% reporting like further evaluation. What's really interesting here from a like intersections place is that when we have youth, young people who also experience anxiety or depression in your school, they're 64, 62% more likely to be at high risk of an eating disorder because those things co-occur. If you have a student who's using substances like alcohol or cannabis dependency, especially for like my high school folks in the room, 74 and 79% also are likely to be at risk for an eating disorder. Our racialized Canadians, 37%, and our 2S LGBTQ communities at 48%, also more likely to be a high risk. And there was a pre-submitted questions about gender differences around eating and body image challenges. And something that's been like quite interesting now getting to do work with kids is a lot of the like in classroom that when we have a chance to do community education programming in the classroom, we'll do that in like a mixed gender, like gender inclusive way. We're not like splitting like boys get this education and girls get this education anymore, which like historically did happen around body image. We're not doing that anymore. And what we're noticing is like the language that kids even use about risk factors is like changing. So like if I ask a bunch of girls if they're dieting, they'll like know what that is and like can identify with that, but the boys like will say no. But if I ask the boys if they're like bulking and cutting, they'll say yeah. And that's fundamentally the same thing. Like dieting, bulking, cutting are all means of changing your food intake for a body-related goal. And that's something that's a really key risk factor for experiencing disorder eating. And there are gender differences between how our kids potentially like identify and get information from social media, from the people around them, from at home on these kinds of topics. When you see the risk for 2Ls LGBTQ communities being the highest, I want you to know that that has nothing to do with their gender or their sexuality, but the way like society treats people. We usually think of gender and sexual orientation as having like a look, like we have an idea if someone is gay or lesbian or trans or whatever, that also means that like a body-based mental health issue, like an eating disorder, can show up as means of coping for someone in their life. And it's just like changing how they're eating, changing how their body looks can also become a way for that child to potentially like find a way to like pass or like find acceptance or find belonging in different ways. So that's a really like messy intersection. And that's only because they just want to be in environments that are accepting and respecting of who they are. And so we know that when we create more positive school environments for our students of color and our queer students, eating disorder risk also drops. So those things all go hand in hand and is a point that I want to make here. The other thing for the data nerds in the room is that unfortunately, like the risk is actually much higher for the younger the kid is. So the lowest that this survey went to were 16 and 17-year-olds, and the high risk and further evaluation needed was the highest for 16, 17. Unfortunately, I think that would actually even get higher the younger we go. In Ontario, we have like a large student health survey that goes out to over 10,000 students in 200 schools across 46 school boards in our province. And these are the numbers that we found around body image and eating. Over half of students reporting being preoccupied with their weight and shape or experiencing bullied around weight and shape. These are students in grades 7 to 12. And you can see a bunch of eating related stuff here that are all higher than a quarter to a third of students. So they're impacted by it and they're hearing it younger and younger. I don't want to center Ontario only. And so we also had some data at the exact same time, exact same group of students, 7 to 12 in BC, and saw similar numbers, 40 to 60% of youth reporting impacts with their body image, 19 to 55%, depending on the age, impacting engaging in risky dieting behaviors. And the prevalence of eating disorders is actually double that of diabetes. So you hear like, well, sometimes in health, like get to hear a lot of like worries about things like obesity or diabetes. And I want you to know that the prevalence of eating disorders is actually much higher than both of those things in childhood. We just don't hear about it the same way. And I think part of it is because when kids do get harassed or bullied, weight-based bullying or appearance-based bullying is the number one form of bullying across Canada. And so those things, I think, impact the way that we now talk to kids about their bodies and about eating. There was another pre-submitted question about like someone was asking about something called orthorexia, which is like a specific type of eating disorder experience where it's less about like weight and body image, but more so around people wanting to eat correctly and like only put in the healthiest things into their body. It's an experience that we will see across the board from like lower SES kids who are trying to find any way or getting lots of messages about social mobility. And so they now think they have to like be efficient in every single aspect of their life, but also like high SES kids where that's the messages they're getting from parents and their peers and etc. So they're thinking that they have to eat correctly. Regardless, orthorexia leads to a lot of restricting because it's really hard to control your eating environment that rigorously throughout 7 days a week. And you can see some of the like thoughts and feelings that show up here. I've bolded some connections that I think are related to our health curricula. I think eating disorders, negative body image, negative eating, like keeps someone from engaging in their life. It like overemphasizes its worth, like its emphasis on someone's self-worth. There's unrealistic standards about beauty and fitness and muscularity. There's a lot of like mental health stuff around anxiety around eating or shame around eating. And I think these are all components that are like related to what we do in classrooms. And it's when you see these thoughts and feelings that then you can start to get to the behaviors at the bottom there, whether they're weight control, whether they're just eating related with no body image stuff at all, whether it's about binge eating or restricting, or even just a lot of the body-based social comparison. A really common question we get from like parents and families especially is like why? Like how come? Like how come my kid, etc. And this is just to let you know that what causes an eating disorder, what causes challenges in this area is no one thing. It's almost always a combination of biopsychosocial factors biologically in terms of how our bodies work and metabolism and genetics. Psychologically, like kids who are often like quite perfectionistic, who are often really like high performing at your schools, but also like now can't turn that off. So it's not just about grades anymore, but also about like how they are perceived or how many friends they have or how they want their body to look. These kids often have like a struggle with like naming and labeling their emotions. And so some of that like mental health promotion work, I think there's an intersection there. The thing we're going to focus the most on from our like Apple Schools comprehensive school health kind of approach is that sociocultural risk. And like the lesson ideas that I have for you are going to try to be focused on how do we decrease that sociocultural risk as much as we can. And what I mean by sociocultural risk is like the kinds of appearance related comments that people get from their friends at school or from their family at home, the like appearance standards they see on social media, and how do we combat that? And like kids facing discrimination or oppression based on like the size of their body or their color of their skin or their gender identity. I've like put in one slide here on social media because even though it's not something I'm explicitly going to talk too much about today, I think when we hear body image and eating messages, we all know that like all of us and our kids are like getting these messages online a lot. And there's been a lot of research on that recently, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic on like what's going on with kids and screen time and mental health. And I wanted to give you like a one slide snapshot of like what is the research saying as to what's going on in this area because I think there can be like a lot of misinformation about this in particular given how much like social media regulation is in the news and like part of government stuff. So there are two main theories about social media and like why it might impact kids' body image. One of them is called the social comparison theory, where like kids are either making upward comparisons, so they're like looking down on themselves and they're like following people who they want to be like, or sometimes kids are making downward comparisons, so like they are like looking down on the people around them and like follow people or whatever to like try to like one up them all the time. So that's like one idea. The other idea is called this like reinforcing spiral hypothesis, where it says that like screen time is mediated through the content that's displayed, and people expose themselves to content that's in line with their current mental state, their current biases. And so when we have platforms that use algorithms, users can like automatically be recommended certain body-related content based on their social media use to date, and that just keeps the cycle going. That once people fall down the algorithm rabbit hole on like Instagram or TikTok, you just keep reinforcing that over and over and over and over again. Um, some of my colleagues in Montreal who work at the Montreal Children's Hospital, Audrey LeVay and colleagues, had a really cool study that like tested which of these hypotheses might be more right. And they found a few things that I'm going to try to explain in this diagram. What's interesting is that teens who reported higher levels of social media and TV use, not necessarily video games, but social media and TV screen time, were more likely to report eating disorder symptoms. And while increases in screen time exposure in 1 year, like let's say time one, time two, time three, time four, time five, are all types of years. So, like, think about that as like 2017 to 2022. Increases in screen time exposure increased eating disorder symptoms. Um, no matter what, it's not necessarily in the same year. So, like, once a kid is on their screens, what we actually see is it kind of takes a little bit for that to start to really hit their self-esteem in year two. And it's by year three and year four and year five that we're really starting to see the mental health implications of that. Um, and so, like, pretend you're a kid who used social media during COVID. Your self-esteem is going to start to tank a bit that year, but it's going to really start to tank the year after. And you might not actually see mental health starts to change until year three. And so, when we talked about like eating stuff, body image issues being like a shadow pandemic, this is kind of what that means, is that um, a kid is not just struggling with their current behavior, but it's going to impact them longer term. And it's also why we want to talk about doing these things early. And I know most of the registrants here today were from like K to 6-ish and who you're working with. If we wait till a student is in grade 8 or grade 9 to give them this kind of education, there's a chance that we probably already missed the boat. And so that's why it's important to start to sow these seeds now. What's really interesting from a hypothesis place is that this research actually is more in favor of the social comparison hypothesis, not the spiral hypothesis, because it's self-esteem that's mediating the connection that comes from increased screen time, not the other way around. So it's not that screen time immediately leads to disordered eating because it keeps on showing disordered eating content over and over again. It's that screen time is hurting a kid's self-esteem. So they're making some sort of judgment about themselves, and that is what's leading to the disordered eating. So it's the comparisons that kids are making over time that really end up being the issue. And what really sucks is like we as teachers have a hard job because the platforms that the kids are on know that this is an issue. This is like a bunch of news headlines. They know that it's a problem, but they aren't necessarily doing anything about it in a fast way. And to me, I think what that calls to is just the way that when kids are making comparisons about themselves to other people, we have a society that like ranks some bodies that are better than others. We think some people are prettier or more worthy or more attractive, and that is something that is good and is strived for. And that also means that there are kids who think that there's some people who are healthier than others, and that if someone is healthier, they're deserving of more, they're worth more. And so when you're going to get some recommendations shortly about like what do we do instead of calling things like healthy or unhealthy or good or bad, this is where this is coming from. We're trying to prevent healthism. We're trying to prevent kids from thinking that it's their individual responsibility to be healthy and that they have a moral obligation of society to be healthy. Obviously, we want people to be well, like we want people to be able to live the life that they want to live, but no good comes from helping kids see that they have a lot of individual control over that. What is unfortunate is that we live in a society that's bound on collective social responsibility, even though that's hard. And what that means is we are all dependent on each other as much as we can. And those are the sorts of skills, the way that our health outcomes are actually dictated. That's going to contribute more than like an individual kid making an individual health decision about what food they're eating or what they're doing with their body. Any questions so far on this kind of thing? Because now we're gonna do like, how do we connect this to lessons? But I want to make sure that we're feeling okay about the why. Okay, I'm gonna continue. If you're typing, feel free to type and I'll pop back and I'll see your question. But let me continue. Um, how does this sort of thing, healthism, and I'm gonna use the term of like diet culture here, like show up at school? And so I've got a graphic here that I want you to see that like a question that I think is commonly asked, especially in elementary school. I feel like not really so in high school, is like the like what's in a kid's lunchbox? What foods are they bringing in that way? And I think quite often there's a lot of that kind of like talk around food and like emphasis on them eating healthy foods or eating their healthy snack first or whatever. That's like really well-meaning. Like I think a lot of lunchbox monitoring can be really well-meaning, but I think what I'm gonna hope to push you towards is like knowing that the answer to the question what's in a lunchbox on underneath that iceberg, underneath the ocean, is actually all of these other factors that contribute to what actually ends up being in someone's lunchbox. So you can draw your attention to the different sorts of things that are in there. Taste, price, time for that kid or their family, convenience, what's around them, what grocery stores were around them, privilege, lifestyle, availability, sustainability, energy, food prep and confidence skills, preference, attitudes, satisfaction, all things that I think contribute to what ends up being a decision, let's say, on how a child or how a family is fueling a child. And so that thought of what's in the lunchbox connects to some larger factors, and it's that kind of idea that we're going to be emphasizing today. So, when I try to connect this to Apple Schools, comprehensive school health kind of stuff, this is like, I guess, my customization of our like four quadrants of like policies, physical and social environments, community partnerships, and teaching and learning, ideas that are related to like this thought of body inclusion and being food neutral, being food positive. I'm going to be focusing today on the teaching and learning green bucket because we all are mainly going to be operating here for now, but it's not lost on me that to actually have this bigger impact, we need those other colored buckets to happen too. And I've left some ideas in each of these buckets as just seeds to potentially plant in the resource section of the slide. And so I'm gonna like pop over to one, for instance. I have some ideas that expand on these comprehensive school health principles more. And so know that you will see them on the resource part of the slide when you want to. But know that it's there. And I've tried to leave that as a resource for you, even though we're going to focus on the teaching and learning bucket. But it's not lost on me that we only have one part to play often in this role. So I used Ontario's curriculum because that's my home province, so the one I'm like most familiar with, to sort of guide some ideas on are relevant ideas to share with our students at certain grades. And at least in Ontario, it's as early as grade 3 where getting a chance to broaden a kid's understanding of health becomes a real focus in the curriculum. I'm curious, and I imagine it'll be quite similar in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Um, but it might be a little bit early, might be a little bit later. But to me, at least, no matter what, this is a primary thing. It's an outcome for us in primary school to be able to do. And like a shift that we're wanting to make with our students is like sometimes they think that health, and we as adults sometimes think health, there's an overemphasis on the four factors that you see here: diet, exercise, weight, and like mindset, like willpower. And our hope is that we're trying to broaden our reality and their reality to reflect these sorts of things, that there are lots of these factors that contribute to food and our health and our body image. So people might be asking, and I've gotten three questions that Nicole sent that I'm going to try to address on this slide. Like, if not a diet culture focus, then what? Like, how do we talk about healthy eating? And like one of the questions was, how can healthy eating be discussed when young children when they think in black and white and they're not in charge of family purchases? Students need to learn about healthy eating, but it's hard when they can only eat what their family purchases for them. And so I'm going to give you a few ideas, and I have a few resources philosophically about what this means. And then we're going to talk about some lesson plan ideas about putting this into focus. The first kind of 10-15 minutes are going to focus on food. And then the next kind of 10-ish minutes will focus on body image stuff. I hope to redefine your like knowledge about healthy eating to really emphasize that healthy eating is more than just the foods that you eat. And things like you see on the very left of this slide, um, regularity, adequacy, variety, eating socially, and spontaneity are core tenets of healthy eating. And you will notice that they don't mention nutrients and vitamins at all. That's not to say that that's not important, but healthy eating is like a how. Like how do we do that? What are things that we can focus on? And that acronym of RAVES, regularity, adequacy, variety, eating socially, and spontaneity, when we have kids who struggle with clinical eating disorders and they come into treatment because they're struggling with their relationship with food and we have to rebuild that, RAVES is something that we use with them to think about how do we create a different understanding of their like really warped perceptions about what eating means for their health. And I think there's larger population health impacts of us as a society centering those principles instead. And I think Canada's food guide and already shifting away from like food groups and portion sizes and numbers is already starting to shift in this kind of direction, even if they're not fully there. So regularity is first and foremost. Can we just make sure that every kid eats regularly throughout the day? And it doesn't matter how much they eat at that point, but it's just making sure every couple hours they're putting something in them. They're eating during recess, they're eating during lunch, what have you. As you all know much better than me, that by itself is already a monumental task. Not every kid will be wanting to eat during those times. So I want to just center regularity as like a key focus for our schools and emphasizing that. And you'll notice that regularity comes first. So all of our thoughts around variety and like the nutrients of what someone eats and whether it's all stuff that's going to be biologically nourishing comes after regularity. Because we want to make sure that once they're eating regularly, then the focus is adequacy. So how can we make sure that they're eating enough for their body's energy needs, eating enough to make sure they can pay attention in class, to enjoy themselves during recess, what have you. We then move to things like variety, eating socially, and spontaneity, which are like aspects of positive like relationships with food. A student feels like they're flexible, they can eat a bunch of different things from a bunch of different cuisines, prepared a bunch of different ways. They can eat socially with other people around them at recess or can trust foods prepared by others. And then finally ending on spontaneity where they can like eat intuitively. Like they eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full. And it comes last because that's actually a really hard thing to do. People were pre-submitted a question around kids with neurodivergence and like people who have sensory issues with respect to food. And that like intuitive eating note around spontaneity is actually like really hard for a kid who has sensory issues to get to. What we might be able to do is that a kid with a sensory issue might just need like more repeated neutral exposures to foods, like reading about it, seeing it, touching it, growing it, watching others eat it without any kind of pressure for them to even try it because everyone's going to be a little different in how they approach their food. Some might take to it right away, but some might take like 15, 20 exposures to like before they're even willing to try a food. And I think it's actually really hard to do variety, which is what that trying a new food is, before you have regularity and adequacy. So my suggestion for that person who asked that question around like what do we do with sensory issues in that way at least start and make sure, like I would focus on regularity and adequacy and like making sure that the kid's eating, if even if it's just their like regular comfort food, that's fine for now. I'm making sure they're just getting enough for now. Um, there was some other questions that people were asking with respect to like what's the best way to address like student questions about highly processed foods or like foods not depicted in Canada's food guide. There was actually a really cool resource, which I'm going to click here so you can see it's FAQ from students, that the people who created Teach Food First in BC puts together, which is a primary curriculum, so grades 1 to 8, or I think kindergarten to grade 8, that have some, I would say, like pretty cool responses to questions like that. And so look at question 1. How do you respond when a student says, my blah 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 says that blah 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 are unhealthy and bad for you? And they've given you some ideas for possible responses, like people eat foods for lots of reasons, or what's important is that we each have different foods available to us to what we like, and that foods that give us what we need to grow, learn, and play. They have some other ideas too about like when someone says a comment about someone else is gross, why can't we have pop at school? Like, it's our school's policy to offer water, milk, and fortified soy beverages to make it easier for students and staff to get enough of these drinks at school. These drinks can quench our thirst and support us to grow, learn, and play. What you don't see is pop is bad. And that's an important shift, you know? Like, we're giving you these things instead because we think they're going to be better sources of energy for you. But we don't need to comment on pop being bad. Like if that's what you drink at home, like probably not your fault. That's what you're drinking at home. Um, so anyways, you have this, I think it's like 3 pages of some FAQs. Um, and you can see that here. The other one that I think I'm going to focus on is this one at the top of the page. Why do some students choose to eat packaged snack foods for lunch or snack instead of the free healthy food offered by the school? For if you have a school that has a nutrition program, some possible responses. Some students may not be familiar with or like the foods offered by the schools. Different people eat different ways for a lot of reasons. And what's important is that we each have different foods available to us. And so anyways, a resource that you could potentially use that, at least to me, fits with some of the philosophies that I'm sharing here. A more like visual way to describe that last slide, which has a lot of text, is this food justice pyramid, where, as I've mentioned, we put getting enough food at the bottom, making sure that everyone just has enough, which in an age of growing food insecurity as an economic issue, that's enough of a challenge, I think. And then the stuff that comes above it, like eating nourishing food, enjoying our food, getting pleasure from food, the ethics of what we eat all come after that kind of concept. So, some green slides. How do we do this in a classroom? This is something that I've done with kids as young as grade 2. So my grade 2 folks in the room, you can do this with me. I think you can totally do this in some ways with kindergarten and grade 1s too. I just haven't personally. But like you have a picture of Olaf on this beach here, and I get students to think about how can you all name foods that you really, really enjoy on a cold winter's day? Like imagine an Alberta winter, a -35 with wind chill or whatever. What are some of the things you like to eat? They will say a bunch of random things, usually things that are quite warming. You'll sometimes see kids like extend this by saying like spicy food because it warms me up, or a food that brings me comfort because I'm sad in the winter, whatever. You'll see some cool things like that from kids too. Then you imagine to say, like, imagine now it's like Olaf's on the beach and it's a really, really hot summer's day and it's like 30 with really intense heat and you don't have air conditioning. Like, what are some of the things you feel like you want to eat there? And they'll say things like ice drinks, smoothies, slushies, ice cream, lemonade, those kinds of things. And the point that you're making here is that it's natural that the seasons, like how we feel in our body, impact what we want to eat. And we experience that every single year for Canadians. So, like when we see a bunch of food messaging online and we see diet plans and stuff online, they don't ever really think about what's natural, like what's your local season, like what are your weathers like what food's available to you. They're kind of just prescribing you a California or Florida kind of diet plan, which isn't relevant for all of us here. And so you can help kids see that like how we feel is going to impact how we eat. With older grades, you can now even extend this to like when kids are in relationships or in puberty and starting to experience some like more complex emotions too around like sadness and grief and guilt and whatever. Those kinds of things are also going to impact how we feel because it's natural that some food like gives us comfort while other food doesn't. We all have that, and we don't have to like pathologize the fact that food can have an emotional connection to us. What we just want to make sure is that food isn't someone's only source of coping, which is like a larger conversation. It can be a source, but not the only source. It's one idea. Another idea, which I've done as young as grade 4, but again, I think you can extend this up or down to the extent that you want to. I think you can even make this like an independent project or something too, is to talk about that like food brings us together in so many ways. Like when we get together with family and friends, food's often a big part of it. For my family, like Sunday morning pancakes, or I have like pizza with my brother on a Friday night when I watch a movie. Think about some of the foods that your family likes to eat or the foods that you enjoy when hanging around with friends. Does anybody have any stories that they want to share? So that can be a storytelling activity. That can be something that kids can collage. That can end up being like a journal reflection. You can also make like a cultural adaptation here too of like, are there foods from examples from your like culture that you associate with like specific holidays or occasions, or like foods that hold symbolic significance, and getting a chance to do like a learning library around that? Totally something you can do with this kind of thing too. Again, the point is we are now talking about food in ways beyond biological nourishment in a way that it also is connected to lots of other things in our life. Final kind of like seed to plant. Again, I've done this young at grade 4. I think it can go up or down. Um, we often talk about food being fuel. Um, and it's also important to recognize that food does more than fuel our bodies. So if it's important for me, if I live in Edmonton and I need to drive my car to Calgary, that I have enough gas in my car to do that long drive, which might be a little different than like driving just from like West Edmonton to East Edmonton, or driving from like Calgary to Airdrie or something like that, right? Just like cars, humans need different amounts of fuel depending on what we're doing with our body. So some of us are in sports or like have really active lives outside of school. You might need more fuel than your friend who isn't doing those things because you're doing more with your body. In that way, food is like fuel. But cars don't like sit around the gas station talking about the type of gas they got for like Thanksgiving or Easter or Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, but we do. So food is not just fuel. It is also like, I would say, like nourishment in an emotional or social or cultural way. And so this isn't to push back on the fact that like our bodies are like machines, like they are in their own way. But I think it's also important to remember that like food is more than just our body's more than just a machine, and food is more than just that for us. So some food ideas and some seeds to plant for food. The other slide that I'll leave you with here, and then I'll like pause for questions about food before we do the same thing for body image, is like a slide like this, which is just like some quick conversation strategies with like common things that I hear when I'm in grade 2, 3, 4 classrooms. So for my primary folks, things that I hear are like in the gray. And like I hear adults in these environments saying the things in the gray. And what I'm asking is for us to be mindful about what's in the blue and instead try some of the things that are in the green. So I'm going to pause on this slide for a minute or two. You're free to ask me questions about this, but you're also free to ask me questions about these food ideas before I move on. Any thoughts?
Hey, Ari, it's Andrea. I can ask
Hi.
a question, if that's okay. Yeah.
Sure.
So, um, I've met you a few times and to discuss the Canada's Food Guide and that how that is positioned in the Ontario curriculum. I was wondering if you can explain to the folks in the room on how we can, because we still have to quote unquote connect to the expectations in the curriculum, right?
hmm
What are
hmm
some strategies that you would give teachers in terms of language, how we can look at food, approach food, while also talking about the Canada's Food Guide? But
Yeah.
again, also understanding like critical thinking skills, validating the diversity in our class.
hmm Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Have done some searching since our conversation about that too, and I found a cool document which is linked here under shifting our principles to meet curriculum expectations. So I'm going to click
Okay,
it.
got it.
And this table gets to talk about like different things that we think we can do on in primary grades. So like K to 2, 3 to 5, and 6 to 8. What
Right.
you'll sometimes see is a lot of our like curriculum expectations around eating will like talk about things like enhance critical thinking about food or like talk to students about classifying food. And quite often our lesson plans have then thought of classifying as healthy and unhealthy as an
Right.
example, right?
Okay.
I would say like a food positive shift is you're also talking about classification of foods when you get to talk about non-nutrition attributes. So color and shape and taste and texture and sound and smell and how it grows are
Mhm.
all ways to I would say meet the curriculum expectation of classifying foods without having to use the like
Healthy
dietary
versus,
terms of
yeah,
that. Right.
yeah.
This table, I think, also gets to talk about like some of the expectations on exploration. There's also in grades 3 to 5 and 6 to 8, like junior and intermediate, some more expectations around like reflecting and connecting ideas. And so it gives you some thoughts on what are ways to reflect or connect
This is
ideas.
the CP one, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as well as 6 to 8. Like there's sometimes some expectations on our different provincial curriculums about balance.
Yeah.
And these are, to me, also ways that I think you can talk about balance without necessarily needing to be
Mhm.
labely about it. So this table potentially is something for folks who feel like they're really struggling with that. You can find that on the shifting our principles to meet curriculum expectations note here. Um,
I really like that second nugget in that last row. Reflect on what influences food choice,
mhm. Yeah,
advertising, social media, like the food literacy part. Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing it up. No problem. Okay, let's move to body image. And so philosophically, for me, body image, and I'm really mindful of like not emphasizing necessarily body love or body positivity, even though those things can be protective when a kid does feel positive, or when any of us feel positive about our body, it definitely helps. But I think sometimes there's a caution around sometimes positivity or body love also then appearing as another pressure for a student. And then I don't think we're any different than social media pressures in some ways. So the goal, I think, to start is like, how do we create a foundation of neutrality around a body image? And if kids then want to feel positive on top of that, wonderful. Like we're building positivity on top of a foundational platform of neutrality instead of positivity as an antidote to negativity, which sometimes mental health wise can just like split a kid, that they'll have a really, really harsh body image critic and they'll have a really, really like exuberant positive body image self and they fight all the time. If we build on top of neutrality, we're more likely to prevent that kind of splitting overall. And so when I say neutrality, what that sounds like in like child words or whatever are like can be experiencing I'm unhappy with my body, or I put up with my body, or I might not love my body, but I respect it and take care of it anyways, or a little bit older. I don't feel limited by how I feel in my body or what I think about it. My body is what allows me to express myself and go after my goals and passions. we want to normalize here that like our body image is changes and it's a trait. Like we can feel good or not good about our body in any different day, but also a state. Like our immediate feelings can change from one day to the next. The concept here is like what I would say is called embodiment. Like, how do we help a child and an adult feel grounded in their body in some way and feel like their body is something that helps them do what they want to do in their life, like express their voice, feel capable in their body, follow their passions, or like care for themselves. And caring for your body helps you care for your life. And this is something that, like, that's the theory behind it. So what do we do in practice? There's an activity that I've done as young as grade 3, but again, I trust you all. Like, think about how you want to extend up or down. But I've done as young as grade 3 personally, called My Body Can, where you get a piece of paper, give them something to draw with, fold the paper in half, and get them to draw a picture of themselves on one side. And I often have to give the reminder, like, you won't be showing anybody. It's not about perfection with your art. Just your picture can be for you. And on the other side, we want them to circle 3 things in their image, like list 3 different parts of their body and their favorite thing that their body allows them to do. So, an example, I like my hands because they help me hug my friend, or I like my tongue because it helps me taste yummy food. The thing we're shifting there is like you often will have kids say, like, I like my hair because it looks nice. And I would say, how do we make that non-appearance related? Like, I like my hair because it keeps my head warm, or I like my hair because it helps me express myself. Cool. That is a-okay, you know? And that's the kind of shift from like an appearance related thing to something a little bit more functional. Um, you might notice like there can sometimes be like sensitivities around kids with physical disabilities that you want to be mindful of with the functionality part of this. So I don't talk about that explicitly. You can help them see anything that they want. And I will often have my kids with physical disabilities like point to internal things. Like I like my stomach, or I like my heart, or my brain, or my whatever. Like they will say often really creative things here, and that's totally allowed. It doesn't have to just be something in their like external body form. Totally okay here. One idea. Other ideas, I have 2 different videos here, one that's a little bit older, one that's a little bit younger. They're both videos that are under 5 minutes long and have captions on YouTube. Um, and I think they like allow for ways we can talk about like how we de-link weight and health and those 2 things being linked. Poodle science is a little more sciencey, a little more like, yeah, bio-y. Whereas sometimes you're a caterpillar is a little bit more like psychology, a little bit more like human storytelling element. And so you can see the different grade levels as a result, but they're both really nice, like watch, reflect, like think, pair, share, get to talk about this kind of concept in some way. And obviously you can watch these first. Um, some other ideas, like as you all probably know, U Calgary has a list of comprehensive school health resources that like sometimes will contain videos like this. Finally, from a conversation place in talking about bodies, I'm gonna leave this slide up in case people want to ask me body image conversations, and then I'm gonna take 2 minutes just to show some things for the high school folks in the room because I know that there are a few people here, just less of you, who were like grade like 9, 10, 11-ish. So I'm going to show you all a few ideas, but any questions about these kinds of body image things? And these are some conversation tips. Hang tight for 1 more minute.
Hi, Ari. This is Jen Flynn from Apple Schools. I don't have a question, but I just so appreciate the like try this instead column for both this and the the eating and the neutrality, I think it's so ingrained in us. We hear these things all the time, and we're all working really hard at like always trying to say the right things. And your practical examples are really helpful. And I think the more that we hear and see the variety in practical examples, the easier it will get, and more natural it will feel to say them because they all feel better when you're reading them. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the practicality in these slides. I always want to have like a sticky note. Just be like, I'm ready. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing it up. And yeah, like there it's quite often like these slides, previous iterations of them look like instead of, or like they had the try not to say in red, and I like people had wanted that, but I like am mindful that for us as adults doing this work, we all have like our own work to do on these topics probably also, which is like a little bit different than like when you just teach like math or like science or something. Like I feel like we don't have the same level of immediate interconnection with it as we all have our own messy relationship with eating and body image probably, you know? So I think it's like natural that we are going to have our own work that we have to do with it, and it might be hard to sometimes use the try this examples because it might not feel true to you. And what's important is that you find something that does somehow and use these as potential like role models or whatever to look at to see like are there bits and pieces here that actually fit my experience. Because I think your kids knowing that you're also human and that your body image changes and your relationship with eating changes is really helpful for them to know. Because we're trying to push back against the like perfectionism of it and the like supremacy kind of you can eat perfectly or eat right all the time or look perfect all the time. Like, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, it feels much more authentic, and honest this way instead of like a band-aid, like, no, 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 everything's fine, everything's fine. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for that.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, I'll give my seeds for my high school folks quickly because you all have been patient with some of the primary stuff. Um, Something I've done in high school, whether that's in like a food sciences or like a family studies kind of connection here, is like just getting a chance to allow kids to make connections between weight and healthy eating and physical activity and find out where they learned about those things. You can do this as like a journal thing. You can also do this with like sticky chart paper and sticky notes and getting them to go around and then doing like a go around and see what other people said. Um, I would say some people can get really scared about putting weight up on here, but I want to let you know that unfortunately, kids as young as 5 are already forming relationships between weight and eating and weight and health. They already have that coming to you. And what sucks is that when they don't feel comfortable bringing it up in school, they don't have you around them to like help potentially catch a conversation. When they're online doing this, they're unfiltered, you know? Like we have no idea what information that they're going to be getting, whether it's from AI or from Google or from forums or message boards or like, yeah, Instagram, TikTok comments, et cetera, et cetera. So getting a chance to hear and see what links kids already have when you're doing nutrition stuff in high school helps you now have information if you did this first to like get ideas for how you want to structure your lesson plans later on in the unit because kids might be coming in with their already ingrained connections, or you might learn that they're coming in already having some like proactive inoculation against diet culture, which is a cool thing to find out. BC's Teach Food First curriculum has some ideas about this, but I also think that if we do this in like a myth busting kind of way, off SHIA, the Ontario Family Studies Home Economics Association, has a like lesson plan module about recognizing, rejecting, and revising diet culture narratives. Those are other things you can look at. I also really love the like teacher fan club podcast. They have like a weight neutral series specifically that like might have some seeds that you can plant in this way too. Doing this as like a myth busting, like looking at diet culture messages and getting them to write alternatives is like another thing we can do. The final thing I'll share for high schoolers is I think getting to do some like media decoding is really helpful. So if you have a chance to get them to bring in videos or posts that they've seen, and then getting a chance to like have different groups of them ask questions like this, and this is just a like tailored list. You can obviously take out or adjust this if you want. But the point is like you can question any piece of media on all 7 of these domains. There are ways to like teach kids some of the media literacy that is like underpinning food messaging and body image messaging. And I think it's like a super cool high school thing to do. I think we have to find ways to do this even younger, but I don't know. This is stuff that I feel comfortable saying is a high school thing for now. But I think that's where I'm at and where I'm at in terms of time. And so I'm gonna leave you with some takeaways and then pause for anyone who wants to hang back for questions without the recording to say that I hope that you've had some ideas around we can rethink how we talk about and teach about food, nutrition, and bodies, to know that our words matter and there are some ideas that you can potentially play with there on your own ways that you respond, whether that's from the document that I shared or some of those conversation slides that I noted. That diet culture influences all of us. There's a larger population health issue that we have here, like I said in the beginning with the studies that I showed around this topic. And so it's natural that we're going to run into it and that we're going to struggle with it. But if we get to focus on health broadly and not any individual kind of quantitative indicator, I think we're going to be better off for it. And that we can develop neutral and even positive attitudes around food, eating, and bodies, like I think is definitely possible. If you or your students ever feel like they're struggling in some way, know that our NEDIC services on our helpline and live chat are free to access. So are our community education services for publicly funded schools. Nicole and the Apple Schools folks know more about that. But you're always free to reach out to our helpline or live chat. A family member can too, or a student who's a friend. But happy to be an ongoing resource for you. And I think I'll throw this back to the Apple Schools folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Ary. So just a sincere thanks, Ary, for joining us today and your valuable insights and the practical supports that you've provided for schools. We greatly appreciate your outstanding professional development. Like Ary said, if you have any questions for Ary or our team, please feel free to stay on the line. Will be available for about the next 10 minutes. In our follow-up documents, we will send over the slide deck. We will send the links to NEDIC's page so that you can look at the standard programming that can be available for schools, as well as the links and things that were shared. And yeah, we are also going to send a recording over of the presentation as well, if you would like to share it with your staff. So again, Ary, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you very much to everybody who joined us for this professional development. We look forward to seeing you again, and we really wish you a great rest of your day. Bye for now, everybody.